Hello, I'm Matt Jarvis from Tabletop Gaming, and I love listening to Bored Shitless, which won't leave you bored shitless.
Hey there, Chitheads, and welcome back to another episode of Bored Shitless. I'm Leki, and I'm joined today by Tristan and some very special guests. Tristan, who are we talking to today?
Today, we are lucky enough to have a couple of industry titans with us. We have Matt Jarvis, editor of Tabletop Gaming magazine, and Dan Jolin, supremo game journalist, who also writes for Tabletop Gaming magazine, but who I've been reading for years as the columnist in Empire magazine, reading his movie reviews and stuff. It's great to have you both on the show today, guys. How are you doing, Matt and Dan?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's a bit full on. It's kind of the start of the year, and kind of getting back into the swing of it still, even like a month in. But yeah, I mean, it's exciting times really. Hopefully this year will be a hell of a lot better than last year in the wider world, but we'll see how that goes.
Fingers crossed for that.
And yes, cheers for having me, guys. I'm not sure I describe myself as a titan, though. I think I'm more of a lucen.
Nice.
Nearly spat water all over my PC there. Thanks very much.
Oh,
The wordplay begins. Cool.
yes.
Well, let's start at the beginning then. Can you just tell us about yourselves, guys? So we'll start with you, Dan, since that's alphabetically. Just tell us about you. First of all, your gaming interest and how you got started with board games in the first place, and how you sort of went on to start writing about board games professionally.
Well, I mean, it's one of those people. I think when you ask most people that question, which I of course have, you end up kind of getting a potted life story, don't you? So I'm gonna try not to do that too much, but just kind of like the key points were really played Dungeons and Dragons whilst in my very, very early teens, which pretty much put me on the path for life. But then sort of, by the time I was going off to university and, having girlfriends and getting married and all those kind of things, the video game boom happened. So then it was all video game, until like about, I think 5 years ago now. I haven't really been keeping track. I was just kind of getting a bit tired of video games. It all felt a bit samey. And then I realized there was this wonderful world of board games that I hadn't really discovered. I mean, I'd played a lot of Talisman and played obviously like games like Risk and what have you. But I think it was somebody bought me Lords of Waterdeep, because obviously the Dungeons and Dragons connection, which is still one of my favorite games. Excellent. And I think I bought Carcassonne as an anniversary gift to me and my wife, because we had a young baby at the time, and we couldn't go out. So I said, let's have a great night in with this, and that kind of started it all.
And then down the rocky road to even deeper geekdom.
Yes, well, indeed, yes. And then in terms of writing about it, I mean, I was running about movies most of my life, and I was working for Empire magazine, and it's Empire is an amazing but demanding mistress, and I didn't really have much time to think about writing about anything else while I was working there, and I decided to go freelance. Just go into business by myself and carry on writing about movies, but it kind of opened up the opportunity to write about something else, and I was just like, I love this stuff. I want to write about this as well. Oh, look, there's a magazine that's all about it. I'll give them a call. Cue Matt.
Brilliant seeing there. Let's get straight on to Matt then. Can you tell us, Matt, how you got started with Tabletop Gaming magazine and the development of that and your involvement in its development?
Yeah, sure. So I actually, I was writing about video games originally, sort of while I was at uni, and then I left uni and went and wrote about PC and tech and video games on that kind of industry side. And I actually got in touch with the then editor of Tabletop Gaming, a guy called Rob Berman, about freelancing for it, because like Dan, I'd kind of always been into board games and was really interested with kind of writing about them and going behind the scenes and all of that. And so I got in touch and said, hey, I'd love to freelance. And at the time, it was a quarterly magazine. So Rob kind of said, oh, I'll come back to you in a bit. We're just finishing up our latest issue. It'll be a few months before the next one. And then before I knew it, I had Rob had actually decided to move on to pastures new, and I was being interviewed for the job, and here I landed. So that's how I fell into this industry and into this magazine. So it'd been going about a year at that point, I think. Tabletop, like I say, it was quarterly, and then after I joined it, it went bi-monthly, and now it's monthly, and I've been here about like 2.5 years, something like that.
It's fantastic. I mean, and it's brilliant that it shows it's almost in tandem with the growth of board games generally. One of the stats I keep hearing cited is that last year on Kickstarter, board games made more money than video games. And so it's like, I think we kind of in the industry talk about this a lot as well, that people kind of get screen burn. I know Dan mentioned it earlier about kind of reaching a limit on video games and then wanting to sort of move on to the next thing. And I mean, I still play video games. It goes through phases of being like hooked on something like The Witcher and putting like so much time into it that when you come off the back of it and you're like coming down from the experience, you just want to get away from screens altogether. Yeah. And I think board games occupy that slot beautifully because you're still sort of ticking that box of being like creatively entertained, but also socializing with friends and. But it's not just a magazine that you're involved with, Matt. You've got the Tabletop Gaming Live show now, and that was it the first Tabletop Gaming Live Expo last year?
Yeah, that's right. So it was the last weekend of September 2018 was our first show, and we've already announced one for this year, which obviously we're really excited about. It seemed to go down really well. We had some really fantastic speakers doing seminars. We had some pretty good games on the show floor, like Keyforge and the new Pandemic. Fall of Rome and stuff like that. So yeah, it's just kind of bigger and better this year, and up from there, we feel like London is a good place to hold it. And yeah, it's just kind of giving people another show to go to and play great games with each other.
And how involved with that are you? I mean, is it does the organisation stuff fall in your lap, or is it something that just happens and you're associated with?
So it's part of the Tabletop Gaming brand. It's by the same company that I work for, a publisher called Warner's. We have like a dedicated events team because we have like dozens of magazines here, so we do events about motorhomes and all that. But gaming is kind of new. So I was directly involved with the seminar side. Particularly, I reached out to all those speakers and kind of targeted the kind of topics and people that I thought would be really interesting. And then, like I say, we have a dedicated kind of events team who put together the rest of the show, kind of the show floor and the exhibitors and all of that. So yeah, so involved heavily on that side. And
so you get to move in like a bit of a fixer then, just the Ray Donovan to the board gaming event world there. Like all the, like
I don't think I've ever been described as that before, but I'll put it on my CV from now on.
Are there any favourite shows that you have, Matt, like that you've been to, like expos and stuff?
Yeah, so obviously, other than our own show, which I would say is right up at the top there, I go out to Essen each year. That's a really interesting one, just because I think that is the big kind of board game, particularly. It's kind of the big board game event. A lot of the new stuff comes out there. Although I'd say in the last few years, we've seen kind of more of a spread across the rest of the year, and things like Origins and Gen Con have always been big. But we're now seeing releases that aren't just holding out for October and Essen. We're seeing things come out in February or March. And I think Kickstarter's had quite a bit to do with that as well. People not just necessarily going straight into shops and using Essen to go that way. So I think it's been good as a whole, really. But Essen continues to be a fantastic show. And obviously we've got things like UK Games Expo here in the UK that we go to every year. And, it's fantastic to meet people from around the country and readers and so on there. So yeah, there's a load of fantastic shows, really. I think that's been the nice thing is, although we've obviously got our own show now, we see it as something that's adding to, like, we're not competing with anyone else. We're just adding to, a lot of fantastic shows that are already out there. Things like Aircon and up in Scotland, Tabletop Scotland and Dragon Meet, of course. And so, yeah, I mean, more shows and more
Well,
reasons to get together is good for everyone, really.
Yeah, more shows usually means more organised play, which can only be good. The amount of people that have games that are like 4 or 5 players, but then only like 2 or 3 people that they can actually get to a table. So they've got this great opportunity to meet new people and play those bigger games that they've loved playing, but maybe don't have the opportunity to for the rest of the year. Bringing it back to Dan then. So obviously with the journalistic background in movie IPs, is there any movies that you've seen that you'd really like to see come to the tabletop? Any that you might have already encountered?
Oh, good question. It's just funny because actually, I recently I've been thinking the other way around. I'll be sort of like looking at what board games would make good movies. But
well, that's a fantastic question.
yeah. But anyway, but to answer your question, I mean, there's this great movie series that they should really do some games on. It's called Star Wars. But really ripe for lots of different tabletop gaming experiences. No, I think it's interesting because you don't. It's a funny thing to adapt because what you always get in the danger of is trying to. And I wrote a piece about this, I think, year before last for tabletop gaming. Is you don't want to just have a game that just here's the plot beats. Do you know what I mean? Because you can just imagine a really dull roll and move where it's just like. The plot of the film, beginning of the film here, end of the film, and the winner is the first one to get to the end. So you've got to think about movies which just have a really good core concept that you could then sort of, drag out and mutate into a game. So I've been thinking about this, like what movies have a really good core concept? So you get something like, to take a recent example, A Quiet Place, right? That's a fantastic film. So good, I think it should have received an Oscar nomination, at least one. But anyway, and I just think that is there something you can do that and someone cleverer than me, perhaps someone like Tristan, for example, who could sort of take this idea of you need to be quiet. Is there a volume level you can play to? Maybe there's actions you can take, but certain ones are more risky than, like in a cooperative game, say, certain ones are more risky than others because they increase the volume and. And maybe, depending on the proximity of the creatures. By the way, does everyone know A Quiet Place? I'm just thought, everyone knows the setup, right?
If you just want to explain the conceit for the audience, that'd be fantastic.
So
Quiet
the
Place
idea
is
is
sound what Bird Box is to looking.
exactly.
No, we've got to explain Bird Box, Tristan.
Right, I'll let Dan take over.
So A Quiet Place is set in a world that's been devastated by creatures, aliens, basically. And they hunt by sound. They're super sensitive to sound. And most people have been wiped out. So it's a mostly dead world. It's a quiet world. And it's their family, and they have a deaf daughter. And so they can all sign to each other. So they've already had a head start with survival. But survival is all about being quiet. So hence the idea of maybe a co-op or a semi-co-op where, maybe actions have, a volume level attached to them, and you're safer when the creatures are further away, but when they're near, you just think about those things, what kind of mechanisms could come out of that. So that would be one. Or I think a really fun game, thinking more about theme, would be something that takes in the entire filmography of the Coen brothers, right? You know how the TV show Fargo is kind of a remix of lots of different elements of Coen brothers movies. You get bits and pieces, and it just seems like such a rich universe that isn't really a universe but could be. I'd love to see someone, I don't know, just take all those movies and come up with something like a card game or something that piles it all together. That'd be great.
Hugely character driven, wouldn't it?
It would.
Yeah. I think so. But and the only other thing I thought was actually an idea I've had myself. Not that I've ever designed a game, but I thought actually I had an idea inspired by the Blair Witch Project. I thought it would be a fun game, which again would be a semi-co-op, but it's about getting out of the woods. Simple thing. Because in the same way as the Blair Witch Project, it keeps changing. They keep losing their way. It would almost be like a tile laying thing, but the tiles move around in some way. Like you think you're finding your way out, but no, actually it's then something happens and they move and you're not where you thought you were. Anyway, there you go.
That sounds cool, Dan. I think that should be the seed of your first game.
Okay. Well, I've already got a title in mind. But
Is it Blair Witch Project?
No. Actually, it's Hag Tract. So there you go. But that's it. I haven't got any further with it, and I'm trying to finish writing a book. So don't pressure me.
One thing at a time. It's interesting what you're saying about sound, like capturing. How would you have that in a game? I was trying to think. Dead of Winter came to mind, because you have sound in that, don't you? And the more sound that you create, the more chance you have of attracting zombies. I think it was Dead of Winter.
I think so. Yeah. It's been a while since I last played it, but it's ringing a bell.
It's interesting.
I wasn't sure whether or not you meant having no sound at the table, as in, you have to play it quietly, and maybe when you get to a certain spot on the game board, you can start to discuss strategy. But then if you leave that spot, you'd have to be quiet again.
Right.
Yeah.
Like Magic Maze. Yeah.
I was just about to suggest the same thing, but like nyctophobia, but sound instead of being in darkness. So we've got a really good feel there for what Dan might be looking for in a tabletop game experience. Matt, what would you be looking for, like, in terms of like mechanics or feel or theme?
Blimey, that is a hard question. I think one of the things that's so good about board games is they kind of come out of nowhere, right? Like, who would have expected last year that the Mind would have been this kind of amazing thing? Because if you describe it on paper, it just sounds a bit crap, really. It's like, oh, you put down cards and they're in order and you can't talk to each other. Speaking of not being able to talk to each other, maybe you could have a quiet place, the Mind. I don't know if that would really tie in that well. It's like you failed. And
my
now
mind
you're
is often a quiet place.
But yeah, I think that's, we see a lot of the same theme kind of roll around, like the old joke of treading in the Mediterranean and that kind of stuff, and obviously Romans and so on. So I think it's actually the stuff that you just really don't expect that that I get really excited about. And so like nyctophobia was one of those moments where it's like, how had no one really done this before? Or how had no one really made a board game that you play blindfolded and feel your way around? So yeah, it's kind of hard to say because, as Dan said, I'm not really clever enough to be the person to come up with those amazing ideas. I'm just hoping that, I have faith that a lot of people out there are a lot cleverer than me in thinking of those kinds of like weird and wacky ideas that will work.
People are getting a lot more experimental, aren't they? Really, like a couple of years ago, it was Beasts of Balance. Just seemed to be like just crazy dexterity games. People thinking really outside the box of just stacking cards up or laying cards out on the table. And now you've got people kind of moving away and thinking, well, why do we have to really, compete with the table so much? Let's take people's sight away. Let's make people not, communicate vocally and see what actually happens. And we see it in a few games as well where people start to just fill in the blanks. So you were playing a really sort of like straightforward solitaire game like Race for the Galaxy. And all of a sudden, me and Tristan spend 10 minutes talking about what the Empire's actually achieved during their Great Expanse. And it never actually happened, but we just like to fill in those little gaps. So it'll be interesting to see where game developers might kind of push those boundaries again in the future. Yeah,
or like legacy games, obviously, which start as one game, and by the end, you can have a completely different kind of experience because you've torn up half of what you were playing and put stickers over the rest of it. And suddenly you're not playing the game you started with. I think, there's a lot more room there for people to go even weirder with that stuff and really kind of make it just bonkers so that you're playing, 6 different games, but they all tie together somehow.
Yeah.
It's I guess the trick is doing something like that overcomes the gimmick of it to create a compelling experience. Which was, I think it was the game Exit the Cabin, Leki?
Yeah. So it's like an escape room sort of trope, wasn't it?
And that had some cool mechanics in it where you obviously trying to solve a puzzle to escape from this cabin, but then it sort of breaks the fourth wall. I don't know if this is a bit of a spoiler, but you
definitely go on.
It actually asks you to reference the barcode on the back of the box is one of the clues. And that felt like a real sort of head scratcher. It took us a while to sort of get our heads around that one, but it did make you literally, think outside the box kind of thing. But I wonder how much, I guess from a thematic gamer's point of view, and I can get a bit cynical about games that just come out and throw, here's a big gimmick at you, and then maybe fall short of delivering the experience that was intended. I guess Seafall could be considered one of those, which was a hugely rich legacy game, which absolutely tanked commercially and critically. I don't know, did you guys, Dan and Matt, did you actually get to play that?
I tried. I sort of had this big plan with my son, actually. Like, we were just like, we're going to do Seafall, and it's going to be, let's do it. And we finally sat down and we started playing the prologue, and actually we'd written our names on things. We played it for an hour and we just weren't feeling it. Yeah. I mean, he was just like, can I go do something else now, please, Dad? And I was just like, yeah, I guess. And off he went, and that was it. And now I've got this kind of, it's not even like I can sell it to someone else now because I've already written, like my son's written he's chosen his character and written the name on them and everything. So it's just sitting there on my shelf, and I'm like, I love the look of it. I read the rule book and thought this looks great, but I couldn't get past this 1 hour. It's really long.
We've actually covered it in the podcast. We did start, Leki and I, with the guys. We started a campaign. We got maybe 3 or 4 scenarios into it, and it was wonky because you get this new objective that's introduced, and then it throws everything out of whack, and then someone achieves this one objective and wins the game almost by accident, kind of thing.
Yeah,
and it kind of put the guys off. And I think at the end of it, I was the only one who still wanted to play, maybe to get my money back on the investment. So, but it and obviously we weren't the only people to feel that way. I don't like to diss on other games, but obviously critically and commercially, it wasn't as successful as perhaps people had thought it was going to be. And it kind of ties back to that point of trying to make a new game, make something that's compelling and interesting, and come up with a really interesting and unique way of doing it that's going to keep people coming back and want the next in the series and stuff. But I guess it hasn't impacted legacy games in general, because we're still seeing a huge emergence of these now. They seem to be every other game on Kickstarter has a legacy element or
a great
something.
Yeah, a great symptom. Well, not a symptom, sorry, but a great sort of side effect of this the legacy theme coming into it is that campaign games have really taken off again. Designers are designing games with a real campaign element in mind, even if they're not legacy. We've played some brilliant ones recently.
That was what they were called when we were kids. It was campaign games, and then legacy is basically a campaign game, but you rip stuff up as you go. And I think there's 2 sides. People fall on one side or the other with that, don't they? They're either they love the uniqueness of it and the fact that each decision is permanent kind of thing, and then there's other guys who are like, but think of the environment, You get to the end of a game pandemic, and that's it. It has to go in the bin,
Well, we've got all these lovely rules and mechanics coming up in new games, and different sort of new twists and old ideas possibly. So when you guys are looking at games to review, what sort of element of a new game draws you to think, yes, I'm going to have a go at Root this time, or I'm going to try there's a Nyctophobia? What is it that makes it stand out for you?
It's a funny one, because sometimes it can be, like we were saying, it can be something completely fresh. You can be like, whoa, I've never seen anything like this. And even if it might have a bit of a familiar theme, but the actual gameplay might be really original, or it might be kind of the other way, and that it does something newish with something that's familiar. So something I've been playing recently is Crusaders Thy Will Be Done, which is a very kind of full-on title.
Sounds very heavy.
But it's not. The surprising thing is that it looks heavy. So it uses a rondel mechanism that's similar to is it Trajan? Stefan Feld's game. I don't know how to pronounce it. I've never said it out loud. I'm probably just embarrassing myself with all the Roman historians that listen to your podcast. But
we're not allowed to judge people for mispronouncing words, apparently, because it means they learned those words through reading, so they should be judged.
Right.
But, so it uses a similar rondel mechanism to the game I can't pronounce. But instead of where you land as you're putting your little pieces around, instead it's where you take them from. And the number of pieces you pick up out of that segment is kind of dictates the strength of that action. And so, although it's similar to Trajan, which the designer actually, like in the rule book, he basically throws his hands up and says, it's directly inspired. It kind of gave me this idea. It turns the whole idea or mechanism on its head. And so that was really interesting to see, here's something that was kind of pioneered in, by Stefan Feld, but here's someone doing something new with it, and it works really well, So I think there's still room for kind of new ideas in old concepts, that kind of thing. So it's a balance between all of them. Sometimes you get a really promising game that might do something like the unique games, which I think Dan can speak to better in terms of he took a look at Discover Lands Unknown, which kind of did the board game side of that. And applied those concepts to a board game, and you look at that, and I think, Dan, you didn't seem to have a particularly good time. And then Book versus Keyforge, for instance, which had similar unique ideas, and has become this big hit.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always excited by new ideas like that. I mean, the second I heard about Discover, Lands Unknown, I was just like, brilliant, great, I want to play that, But just because the box you've got is different from anyone else's, that doesn't necessarily make it a great game. And it sadly it didn't quite work. And as I've said before, I think there was an element of it lost something because of that attempt to make it unique, like having different cards kind of algorithmically, selected. So it just didn't quite knit together. It didn't feel right. And you asked earlier, what do you always look for in a game? And my number one thing is a good story. Now that doesn't necessarily mean a narrative embedded in the game, even though I do love that, and I love campaign games. I loved Stuffed Fables last year, for example, which did that wonderfully. But I just mean, does actually playing a game, do you get a good story out of it? Keyforge is a great example of that. Every game is a brilliant little story of, snatch and grab, and it swings back and forward, and it's really dramatic, and there's shocking twists. And Wildlands as well. It's just kind of the way that plays, and you get these little scenarios happen where, one of your guys is jumped by three of their guys, but just manages to hold on for like 5 rounds, whittling them all down, and it's this epic fight, So it doesn't have to be like someone's written a story that fits around the game. It's just you get a good story out of it.
Yeah.
And Discover failed on that front because all the times I played it, and I played it with different people, you'd keep going, well, I don't really get the story here. What's actually happening here? At the start is great. Oh, we're all stranded on this island or on this mountain or this desert, wherever, and we've got to survive. And then you start doing the things that you need to do, and then it throws in these story elements at you, and you're like, well, what's happening now? So what do we got to do now? And then you kind of, in every game I played, we reached this point where everyone's just sitting around scratching their heads, going, well, should we just try this then? Should we just try that? And it becomes random. It feels random.
Yeah.
No game's fun where you just feel like you're randomly casting around, thinking, well, maybe I'll try this. Every game, every great game has a great narrative. Monologue over.
Fair enough.
It's funny you say that about Discover Lands, Dan, because our friend Dave brought it over and we played the first game of it, and I was hooked. And as you say, the whole survival thing, and you're on this desert island, and you have to explore and discover. And I was so hooked on it, in fact, that because he explained this whole every game is unique element, I went out and bought my own copy. Like the next day, and brought it back and set it up, and I was looking at the components going, this is the same game. So I don't know how badly I'd managed my own expectations of it, but it was the same mission, there was similar characters, same tiles, and I played through it again. I was like, okay, it's good, but when when you played it once, you kind of know the surprises in the first mission. So I'll go on to the next scenario, and we played that, and it fell flat. And I was really disappointed because there were so many things that were compelling about it, having like this tech tree where you can build your own, survival elements and weapons and armor and all that kind of stuff, and going around gathering resources and having adventures. That speaks to me. That in itself tells a story. Yeah. But I don't know if, as you say, it's just the sheer logistics of having to produce however many thousands of copies of the game and make them all fundamentally unique as well, but all still be compelling in their own right. And it's only 5 scenarios in the box, and I just think it would have been done so much better to forget about this unique thing, design the game, and actually just make it a straight campaign of whatever 12 scenarios or something that just tells one focused story all the way through, using the same mechanisms, making it semi co-op with that. And if they'd just done that, I would have given it a much better review.
So speaking of that, what sort of review did you give Seventh Continent? I feel like that's the sort of exactly the same sort of game, except for it's a very linear narrative, but you only play it once.
Upsettingly, I couldn't get Seventh Continent. I missed it. I missed the boat. However, I think Matt can answer that one.
Yes, I have played Seventh Continent, but I haven't played all that much of Discover, so I'm kind of on the other side. And I really like Seventh Continent. I think it's doing a thing that we're seeing quite a lot of, like Dan saying about these kind of more and more stories coming into games and these kind of campaigns. And we're seeing this kind of trend of essentially choose your own adventure Although I don't know if I can say that because I'll get sued now. If Netflix is anything to go by.
As long as we don't mention Bandersnatch.
Yeah, exactly. But we're seeing that kind of creep into more and more games. We're seeing it we saw it in Seventh Continent, which I really liked. I felt like it nailed the exploration feel. As, I wonder what's going to be behind this card. I wonder what happens if I do this. And then, you just explored what felt like a huge continent. You wouldn't necessarily go back to the start of it and maybe start again, because you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. That's kind of maybe a weakness in its own right. But even other things like the Fallout board game, which had flaws, like particularly the scoring, but the way that had this kind of I think they had a name for the specific mechanic, but it was also in the new Arkham Horror, where if you do certain actions or you speak to certain people, you basically thread cards into a deck of cards. And then those things can reoccur later on. So you might save a dog from being kicked to death by, a bad guy. And then later on, that dog might join your party because you saved it. And if you didn't save it, you would just never see that. And so I think Seventh Continent and other games like that are kind of, are doing that legacy thing we were talking about earlier, but we're doing it in a way that's replayable and doesn't just involve tearing up things and opening envelopes, but instead it's kind of a more organic kind of, well, you're putting cards in a deck and then they might pop up later, but you can always reset it back to square one if you ever wanted to.
Yeah.
How far did you get with Seventh Continent, Matt? Did you manage to complete one of the stories?
So we didn't review it because it was a Kickstarter. We ended up being a bit on the back foot. So I only played maybe 10 hours or so. We had a feature and an interview with the designer. Yeah, well, I think they said like a campaign goes for up to, they said something ridiculous like
70 hours.
Yeah, or something bonkers. So in that context, I didn't get to the end of any of the stories because I kind of had to prioritize some other bits at the time, but I played enough to obviously do the feature. But yeah, I'm hoping to go back to it at some point, but it is a little bit intimidating, I'll say, because it's, it's nice to have a board game every now and then where you can sit down and go like, okay, in an hour or 90 minutes, we'll be done with this, and kind of be able to move on and not be like, okay, I need to commit 80 hours of my life, as I did with Gloomhaven when I reviewed that. And that was a case of playing, 5-6 hours a night at points to try and see as much of that enormous game as possible.
You binged Gloomhaven?
Oh yeah, for the review, because I only had so much time. So we would sit down every evening and play hours upon hours of it.
Wow, I love that, but I can't get to it more than like once every couple of months, and even then when you play it once every couple of months, it's just like it takes up a whole evening.
You spend 4 hours trying to remember exactly what you're doing and how to set it up.
I think the only viable way to do it is to just change name by deed poll to whatever your character's name is, and then just live out Gloomhaven and see how you get on. Well,
you and I, Leki, we're still paused on Seventh Continent, aren't we? After the first time,
we are, yes. But I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a brilliant storytelling game, but as Matt pointed out there, there's a logistical thing about having a board game that you can play in 90 minutes and just get done with, or one that you're like, can we pick up the story that we left off weeks, maybe even months, or in our case, probably years ago, and still have that same compelling experience? Or are we going to be like, what on earth are we doing now? And
it can be difficult.
One of those where you've got to keep it fresh in your mind to remember all the tactics of the different characters and everything. But if you're willing to do that and invest that time, it gives an inimitable experience. I actually played Gloomhaven through with my 9-year-old now, and we don't play it as often as I'd like, but when we do, it's brilliant because you're in it. You're developing the town, the characters, you're unlocking new characters as you go. And even though we've played, I don't know how many hours worth, maybe 10 scenarios, it still feels like we're scratching the surface in terms of new content, and new stuff, which is a real reason to come back to it.
Yeah, actually, this might not be the right time or place to ask this question, but I've been thinking hard about this with Gloomhaven. As someone and with a group of friends, we've got a party, but we don't get to play it that often. And one of the frustrating things is it's quite a tough game. So of course, if you fluff a dungeon and you've got to restart, it's a big deal. Are there any good sort of any recommendations, like any kind of hacks that you can recommend which work in terms of maybe making it slightly easier, but not in a way that ruins the balance of the game? Have you guys tried anything like that?
I hear you 100% on that. And one of the things we had to just bite the bullet and do was, because bearing in mind, playing it with the 9-year-old or 8-year-old at the time, if you lose repeatedly, it can really kill it.
Yeah.
And some of the one or two of the scenarios, I mean, there's also over 90 scenarios in the book, so there's loads of variety in there, but a couple of them are slightly janky, where if you've got a certain combo of characters, there was one that we had two quite slow moving characters, and after we lost this one scenario 2 or 3 times, I was taking like a mathematical look at it, trying to work out, would we physically be able to get through this dungeon and achieve all the objectives and take out all the bad guys, which was, the mission. And I don't think it was possible. So in the end, I just had to knock it down a dungeon level, which it does say in the rule book, if you want an easy game, just take it down one level. And actually, I don't think that's a bad rule. Some hardcore gamers would squirm at the thought of taking it easy on themselves.
I'm already playing it on easy level.
Oh, right.
I'm already there. You know what I mean? It's like, what else can I do?
In that case, I'm out of ideas. You'd have to ask guys.
Fair enough.
Does that reduce the amount of monsters by half, perhaps? That's a really tricky one. I wonder if there is some sort of like homebrew rules out there for really like simplifying these heavy games.
I suppose the knock-on effect is you don't know how much of a 70-hour campaign you're simplifying, and how it's taking it on yourself. Matt, you mentioned before about being on the back foot with Seventh Continent because it was a Kickstarter. Should we ask the Kickstarter question? What are your experiences and thoughts, guys? Starting with you, Matt, about Kickstarter, and is it a great thing for the industry, or is it a bad thing because we're just getting spammed by so many games every year? What's your overall opinion of Kickstarter and crowdfunding platforms in general for board gaming?
I think it's been on the whole good, really good, because it's kind of thrown open the doors to anyone at some level. You can make a game, have a really great idea, and then a load of people go, "That's a really good idea. I'm going to give you a bunch of money to make it." And if you pitched those ideas to like a traditional publisher or something, they might just kind of go, there's not really, we have to make this and then get it out and see how it does, and it takes up space and we'll lose money. And so the hurdles just become too much, and so no one takes an interest. So yeah, on the whole, I think it's just allowed like really interesting ideas to come out and to kind of find like an audience of even a couple of hundred people. And there's no big risk that way. But on the other hand, we've seen high profile failures. We've seen like delayed projects, and kind of like Evil Dead 2 was obviously a huge mess with Space Goat, and we've seen some other kind of big ones fall flat. And even when the games finally make it out, sometimes they're just kind of a bit rubbish. Sometimes that's the fault of, sometimes they're just bad games. Sometimes it has been the fault of Kickstarter because certain elements have been stripped out to then do as exclusive expansions or to do as extra tiers and things like this. I think the most obvious thing that people often gripe about is miniatures, right? Like you see a lot of games that have a bunch of miniatures in that don't really need them. So like Hannibal and Hamilcar was a game played a while back. It was kind of like a remake of a game from about 20 odd years ago, and they stuck a bunch of miniatures in the box, and we just ended up never playing with them because it was a lot clearer with all the tokens that were also included, and the miniatures took up a load of space. And so then we had a box that was probably 2 or 3 times the size of that it needed to be because they'd sold all these miniatures as part of it. But on the whole, I think it's been really good. Obviously, like the numbers that came out recently are just showing that it's going up and up. I think board game or tabletop Kickstarters, as they call them and break them down, they were like they made 10 times more money than video games or something bonkers.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is just extraordinary. And it's it's up year on year for like the last 3 or 4 years. So the bubble hasn't quite burst yet. I think it will slow down at some point, but on the whole, it's been really good to just get ideas out there and to constantly have inventive stuff. Because if we didn't, to be honest, we'd probably just be seeing a lot of the same stuff. We'd see a lot of new Ticket to Rides, and we'd see a lot of games that involve like fantasy dungeon crawling and stuff like that. But instead, you see RPGs like Starcrossed, which is about people in a relationship, and you're playing Jenga as part of the RPG, and you see this weird and inventive stuff that you just wouldn't see otherwise. Who would put that out if it wasn't on Kickstarter?
Yeah. Do you feel like, along with Kickstarter, as it's becoming more mainstream, do you think the audience is as well, or do you feel like it's still a bit of a a niche gamer audience start maybe like they're a bit more vocal about what they like or dislike about the campaigns? Do you think there's more trolling going on, or that's starting to calm down and it's being a bit easier for developers to just get on with producing the games now?
I think over the years, it's people have kind of come to terms with what might be a good Kickstarter, what might be a crap Kickstarter. You know, people are a little more wary as to, oh, this looks like that date's very close. It's not actually going to make that date. It's going to get caught in all of this stuff. And also you're asking for like 50p to make a game that's going to cost, you know, several thousands to ship across and all of this. So I think, you know, that's part of the downside of it being quite a lot of people who aren't established publishers, who are just kind of making these games out of passion, and they're not really realizing that actually it's a big task to undertake to make a game and get it shipped across and send it out to even a couple of hundred people. And I think the audience, obviously, you're going to get a load of people that gripe, and to some degree, kind of rightly so, because their money's in it, their money's up front. But at the same time, you are seeing this kind of people getting better on both sides of the fence, people understanding how to make a decent Kickstarter that has realistic kind of targets and doesn't promise the world within, you know, half an hour. And then on the other side, you're seeing people be a little bit more lax and understand that things get delayed and things go wrong and stuff like that. So yeah, there will always be that kind of thing. As for the mainstream thing, I think, you know, board gaming as a whole, as everyone knows, is getting more and more mainstream. I think the Kickstarters we're seeing kind of reflect that. Like, we're seeing a lot of video game like Dark Souls and Resident Evil 2 and spin-offs of that kind of stuff that do these, you know, enormous numbers. And so you're seeing people come across from the worlds of like video games and films and things like that. But whether and hopefully they're then discovering, you know, other games like classics that aren't just based on things that they already like. But I think it's a good thing all round, really. You know, as sort of said before, like more people playing more games, like, it's never a bad thing.
Not at all. It's a larger sort of pond for us all to draw from. You get like more interesting variety of fish. How's that for a half-baked metaphor? So, like, it's great to have two journalists on the podcast anyway. So what we could really ask you at this point is change the topic a little bit, would be to find out what do you feel like people respond to most about games and the tabletop hobby in general, from what you've seen in the forums, Tabletop Magazine, and out and about when you speak to people. Is there anything that keeps repeating when people talk about games, what they get most passionate about?
Dan, I'll throw over to you for a bit if you like, because I've been talking a lot. I'm sure people getting sick of my voice.
It's a really interesting question, actually, and you know that's what I say because it's something I've got to think about. But what do people really respond to?
I guess what kind of articles would, you know, which articles do you write down that you notice you get most traction with, or you know, most hits on what people respond to? Well, which ones go stellar, sort of thing? Well,
actually, I mean, funnily enough, it was before I started writing for Tabletop Gaming. I did a piece just about the whole, you know, resurgence of board gaming. Just to, you know, obviously from our perspective, it's the most obvious thing you could ever write. But I read it for the Observer. But they were really interested. They're like, oh, people are getting back into board games, and that for me was kind of personally a journey of discovery as well about, well, what is actually behind this and what's into this. But the most amazing thing was the reaction that it got, you know, the amount of you know, clicks it got and the amount of shares it got, and that was the moment of like, okay, yeah, something is going on here. People, it's not just that, you know, more people are into this, or people like me who are now in their 40s who played Dungeons and Dragons as a kid are getting back into the hobby. You know, there's a real craving, you know, across the board, you know, across generations and all kinds of lifestyle for just getting into a room and sitting around the table with people you like, or maybe even complete strangers, and interacting with a game as a focus. And not a game that's going to make you argue and get pissed off, like Monopoly, for example, but a game that is actually going to keep everyone engaged from beginning to end, you know. And I think that is just the very heart of it is, and I think it's an important thing, is that social element. And we talked earlier about video games, you know, people switching off. It's not with that. It wasn't just the games. A lot of the time, it was the toxic online context that you often got,
yeah.
where it was just like, why am I spending my time being shouted at by, horrible people online?
Trolls.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't I sort of like filter that out and have a face-to-face experience? And who knows, some of those strangers you meet that you play board games with, they could have been one of those online trolls, but because they're with you, looking at you face to face, they are themselves and they're going to be nice. So to me, that I don't know if it really answers the question that you asked, but that's what really got me, was the fact that people are really craving this social experience, and I think that's lovely. And that's why I'll now, for the rest of my life, probably always take tabletop over video.
Yeah.
I think you've made an interesting point there, because Leki and I used to work together in an office. There was about 250 people there, and I had this sort of coming out of the closet moment where I advertised a board game night to like the whole company, and expecting the two of us and maybe a couple of other guys to turn up. And out of 250 people, 25 people showed up. You know, and these are some people that I'd worked with or had been in the same office with for years, and sort of said hello to in the corridor and that. But all of a sudden, you get to know them and start playing with them and spending hours with them, either achieving an objective or working against each other to, screw each other over, kind of thing. And nothing else quite does that. You don't really get that from having a headset on and playing video games with people, or sitting silently in a movie theatre, being entertained, sort of thing. So no, I think it was a great answer, Dan.
Thank you.
But I'm just conscious of time here, so we'll probably just wrap up with one more question. We'll talk about, because you've obviously both got your fingers on the pulse of the gaming scene, maybe sort of highlights and things that you're looking forward to in 2019 in the gaming industry, and predictions maybe of what you think is going to be big, or what you think you're looking forward to personally as a gamer. Start with you, Matt.
Sure. Blimey, what I'm looking forward to personally, I think actually it's I'm not just saying it because it's on the latest cover of the magazine, but actually the new game from Tom Lehman, the Race for the Galaxy designer, Res Arcana, I think is really interesting, because it's this kind of it's similar to Race for the Galaxy in that it's kind of like an engine builder. You're racing to get points. It's in a fantasy theme instead, but it's got this kind of Magic the Gathering mana-ish system to it, in that there are certain elements that you're trying to play and use those to claim monuments in the center, but you only have 8 cards in your deck, so it's this really kind of compact, like a challenge of efficiency, really. And I think that's something that we might see more and more of, these kind of games that have a lot to offer in terms of like strategy and things to think about, but they don't use a lot of cards. We saw game called Maiden's Quest last year, which James Wallace, another one of the Tabletop contributors, kind of gave a mixed review to, largely because of its rulebook. But that was a game that you could play just in your hand. You didn't need a table, so it was played entirely in your hand.
You play on the train and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we'll see more and more stuff that kind of has that rich kind of decision making and all of that you expect from bigger, longer games, but kind of packed into these games that take half an hour, 45 minutes, and are relatively easy to teach people, which is part of the reason why things like Magic and Keyforge are so popular. Yeah. So I think that'll be really interesting. And as well as that, I'm hoping that there are more unique games on the way, more closer to Keyforge than Discover. But I think that's a really fascinating concept that, if they take it in the right directions, could be really, really interesting and do something, like genuinely kind of original and kind of boundary pushing in board games. But I think it's just a case of there'll be some experimentation of what works and what doesn't, and what turns out to be complete crap and feels a bit like it's been made by an algorithm somewhere.
Yeah.
And what feels like, oh, this is actually personal to me. And from that, to add to Dan's point, I'm just looking for games that tell interesting stories that I can have with friends and with strangers, and I think that's the great thing about board games, right? They bring us together and give us things to think about and remember. We all remember playing D&D or Warhammer as kids, and so hopefully there'll be more games that give us that. So in 20 years we're telling stories like that again.
That's it. It's a collective experience, really, isn't it? And the more of those that we can have with our families or friends, like the better off we'll be for it.
Totally. This is becoming very lovey-dovey.
It's just me. I'm just pretentious. That's the problem.
Dan, give us some cynicism. No, I'm looking. Give us your predictions for 2019, either in trends or what you're looking forward to as a gamer.
Okay, well, I think that there's a lot of potential in this movie IP called Star Wars, which I think there might be some games coming out to do with that. No,
I did take his finger on the pulse.
yeah. No, it's good. This actually, you should check it out. These Star Wars films, they're quite fun. There's a lot to them.
And they say that Disney doesn't have film journalists in its pocket.
Oh, that's a big pocket. Anyway, okay, so I'm looking forward to. There's something I'm looking forward to called Call to Adventure, which I actually backed on Kickstarter because it's the Brotherwise guys, Chris and Johnny O'Neill, who've done the Boss Monster games, which are great fun, and it's not a Boss Monster game. And what I like about it, talking about storytelling, twist and storytelling, it's the idea is you're building a hero's story. Each player is actually, so it looks like there's a bit of engine building, but it's kind of what you're doing is you're creating a narrative. So you start with the origin of the hero, and then, they have events in their life. So actually what you're trying to do is you're trying to score the points for having the best story. But that doesn't mean you lose points for bad things happening to them, because obviously that's a more interesting story. And I'm really interested in that, firstly, because it's potential, because they've already got the first expansion, which is, oh gosh, I've completely forgotten the author's name. It's gone out of my... Patrick Rothfuss, that's it, thank you, memory. Which is taking the idea and applying it to existing, like fantasy narratives. And the other thing is maybe this is just a gimmick, but I kind of like the look of it. And instead of throwing dice, you cast runes. You see, they got little runes that you throw down onto the table. So that kind of that got me. So I'm looking forward to that, but mainly because I'm thinking, as I say, we keep saying about games that tell stories. That's literally what you're trying to do is create a story through the game that you play. So I'm interested to see how that works. And the other thing I'm really looking forward to, I know obviously, legacy games are already big and it's not a new thing, but Terraforming Mars Legacy. I mean, come on, it's going to be great, right?
Are they going to improve the artwork?
I mean, sorry, without sounding awful, but bless them, they do it themselves, don't they? It's kind of this, the Brexelius family, they just sort of keep it all in the family. So I kind of like that sort of brazen DIY nature of it. But it would be nice to get better artwork. But
maybe that'll be the legacy element. The art will slowly improve match after match.
As each colony develops, so do the photography and artwork skills. Yeah, I love the game Terraforming Mars, and just any reason excuse to play more and more of it would definitely be welcome.
Well, it's one of my favourites of the last few years, and I think the idea lends itself perfectly to the legacy format. It doesn't feel like it's just bolted on. It's like, you're just doing a legacy game because people are doing legacy games. I think actually it really does make sense, and the scope of it could be truly fantastically epic. So I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent. Well, we've had about 55 minutes of chat now, and hopefully all the listeners really like what they hear from both of you. So leading us on, where can people get in touch with you or find your content? Where can they find your articles and your podcasts and such?
I'll go first if you like. So Tabletop Gaming's available on all good shelves and whatnot. So we're found in supermarkets and news agents and hobby stores. You can also find the latest news. We have a website, tabletopgaming.co.uk, that has the news, and you can pick the magazine up directly from there. It's like free PMP to the UK and all of that. Obviously you can subscribe as well, and then we're on Twitter and Facebook. And if you want to get in touch with me, absolutely drop me an email and we can just chat games.
That sounds lovely. I'll do that.
No, Dan, don't email me. I have enough emails from you.
So I'm at Dan Jolin. That's DanJolin. So you can find me on Twitter talking about board games and movies mostly, and just trying my best to be nice and in no way toxic. I do have a blog, but I just don't really maintain it. So, and also I found out that the name I chose for my blog already actually existed and someone else has got the name. So now I feel bad about it. So if I do put anything up on there, you'll find it through Twitter. So yeah, that's where I am.
Fantastic. Well, once again, thanks very much for joining us today. It was a really interesting discussion. Really enjoyed it. And it's great to see really what might be coming up and more interestingly, really, what kind of gets your motors running when it comes to games.
Well, cheers for having me. It was lovely.
Okay, then. Well, that's it. That was Matt Jarvis and Dan Jolin. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you all again very soon for another episode of Board Shitless. Thanks and goodbye.